You're listening to the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Race 92 is a vintage-inspired racing apparel brand specializing in celebrating vintage race culture and adapting to motorsports today. Check out race92.com for all your racing merchandise needs. I'm your co-host, Aaron McAtee. Our other co-host, you may have seen walking out of a great club with a big old smile on his face. You've probably seen him at a dirt track. He is the one and only Scott Bowie. Scott Bowie, what is going on?
Not much, Aaron. What is up, my man?
Living the dream, enjoying this weather before the next couple months.
Yeah, we're looking at that quickly. We're going to look at 5 months of just cold.
Yeah, because if you remember last winter wasn't that bad.
Right.
So I have a feeling we may get hit with it this year.
Yeah, and then every winter, it's like if it wasn't bad last year, it'll be bad this year. And sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But we shall see, because it's going to come whether we want to or not.
Oh, yeah, it's coming. So our show today is we're doing something a little different. So it's not our traditional show that we normally do. We're doing a season review show with the 2021 IndyCar Series season. And I thought both of us thought one of the perfect people to do this with was none other than Mark Jaynes, who is basically the voice of Indianapolis 500. I guess you would say he's the voice of IndyCar Radio too.
IndyCar Network, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, obviously, I could sit and listen to that guy talk for hours, but it's definitely a great show. Really enjoyed it.
And we have sat and listened to him talk for hours. I tell you, he's a very kind man, very generous with his time. And as always, thank you to Mark and for letting us speak with him, because he has a lot, he just brings a lot to the table, I feel. And it's always just nice to speak with a professional. And, he's so good at what he does, and they're so good at what they do. So it's very kind of him.
Yeah, like I said when we introduced him for the first one, we were definitely the weak link in that conversation.
Yes, nothing has changed. So
no, not really.
I don't see it changing for a long time.
But he's a great guy, and I definitely really appreciate all the support he's given us. I know he's retweeted a bunch of stuff, and I mean, definitely he's given us a lot of time over the past couple months. And I've texted back and forth with him on a couple of things, and just super cool guy. And definitely always enjoy talking to him.
Yeah, I mean, I can't sum it up any better than you just did. He's very kind. He's a teacher at heart, and which means you have to have a lot of patience, which I'm grateful he does. So he can put up with me when we have discussions. But he's got a great personality. He's fun, and anybody listening to the show, hopefully you've listened to him and at his job at IndyCar Network and Radio Network, and he's just so good, so good.
Yeah. And before we get into any news, just want to thank everyone for listening and watching. If you haven't already, make sure you hit like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or check us out on any podcast streaming platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Definitely give us a listen. But not too much news this week. So we had NASCAR at Texas. Kyle Larson wins a race. He secured a top 4 spot for the playoffs or the championship standings, which is no surprise there.
Nope. He's good. He's been good all year. It's going to be interesting. I don't know how many races they have left. I mean, it's just a handful. So Hamlin, he had a little bit of trouble, I guess, but I think, honestly, I just feel like I've said before, it'll just come down to those two. And, Denny's very deserving of winning a championship. I mean, he's been so close. But, man, Kyle Larson is a freight train right now. So it's going to be interesting.
Oh, well, I think it's safe to say he's been a freight train since really last year. I mean, when he started his his tour of
redemption tour, his redemption tour, whatever you want to call it. I said it to you then, and I've said to a lot of people, you just could tell he had a different look in his eyes, and when he would get out of a car, he would celebrate for a little bit. Man, you just see his eyes change, and you could tell he's ready to get back to business. And I would imagine staring into the abyss of losing everything in your life and everything that you love, while he could go dirt racing his entire life and make a really, really great living at it, good living at it. The money in NASCAR is big. And, I'm sure he has a lot of hopes and dreams and for he and his family. And boy, when you look at that all being taken away, that's got to be startling and jolting. And especially when it's at your own doing.
Yeah.
And when, it's like they say, it's not how you get knocked down or whether you knock yourself down. It's how you get up. And I think he's shown that he's good at getting up.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, and if you've ever been to a dirt track and he's racing, if you look at his merchandise trailer, I mean, that line is by far the longest line of any of the other drivers. I can't even imagine how much that guy's making just off merchandise alone.
Yeah, I can't imagine, but I'll say, I like I've said this before, and how long will this last, right? I mean, how long is he going to keep running the dirt? He's still a young man, but he's not fresh faced. I mean, he's been around for a while, and it's one of those things where you hope you see him do it for a while, but you better go see it while you can, type of thing. I mean, he may do it for another 5 years. He may do it like Kenny Schrader. I don't know, but you better enjoy it while you can, because this just does not happen.
Right. And I mean, he's a racer, and there are guys like that. I mean, obviously like Steve Kinzer, Sammy Swindell, who still races. I mean, those guys, I mean, they're not going to stop. I mean, well, obviously Steve retired, but Sammy, I don't think Sammy will ever stop until he just can't do it.
Right. Yeah, I agree. He's going to keep doing it until he is absolutely physically unable to get in that car. Yeah, and if that's how Kyle wants to be, I hope he can do it. But if it's good for him to quit too if he wants to quit. So I know, of course, it's a different era, but I've known drivers who back in their day, which with 60s, 70s, 80s, they had good careers, great careers, but they retired early so they could have a family. Well, he's already got a family, but you just never know. You just never know. I mean. If Owen starts racing, he may decide to go racing with Owen. You just never know what the future holds. So, like I said, you better catch it right now while you can.
Yeah, no, for sure. The only other news I think it's worth mentioning, our boy David Land released a video today about, and this has been going on for a while, all the talks with Andretti going into F1. So it sounds like this week is going to be the big week, because they're at COTA this upcoming weekend, I believe. And I think they're meeting with a bunch of stakeholders and stuff. But it sounds like he's going to be purchasing, or he's at least in talks of purchasing the, I think it's Alfa Romeo F1 team.
I think it's 80%. I don't think it's full 100%. I think it's 80%.
Well,
yeah.
I saw that he was, they were trying to buy like the company, some like financial company that owns 80% of it or something like that.
Right.
And then the talks is obviously all the rumors are if he gets a team, Colton Herta is going to be one of the drivers.
Yep, and that's what all the rumors, and we actually discussed it with Mark last week before we even, we talked about that obviously today, but yeah, I mean, like I said, like you'll hear me say later on, good. If you got that chance, you got to go. You got to go. I mean, that's.
I see both sides. I see both sides to it.
As a fan, you don't want to see him go, and as a fan of the person, you have to say go for it, because as an IndyCar fan, you don't want to see him go, but if you're a fan of the person, you got to say go for it, because you never want somebody to live a life of what could have been. Oh man, should have done that. And if it's something he wants to do, go get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he'll definitely always have IndyCar to kind of fall back on.
I think so too. Yeah.
So yeah, I think because the season review is a little longer, so I think we're going to go ahead and just jump into that. And yeah, hope everyone enjoys.
Yeah. I hope everybody has a great week. Take care.
For today's show, we have a past guest reappearing to recap the 2021 IndyCar Series season. We are rejoined by the voice of the Indianapolis 500 and member of IndyCar Radio, Mark Jaynes. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for joining us once again.
Well,
Really appreciate it.
It's nice to know that that I didn't do much damage in my last appearance, and you guys were willing to have me back. I'm flattered for sure.
So 2021 IndyCar Series season. So obviously this is a first normal season back from 2020, which was probably the most unnormal season probably ever of IndyCar. So what do you think the biggest takeaways were from this season?
Well, I think I did an interview earlier today, and I got the question about what kind of season did Jimmy Johnson have, for instance. Obviously, it brought plenty of attention, plenty of extra eyes to the NTT IndyCar Series, and there are those that would suggest that he struggled. And I don't know that you could ever label a guy that's as accomplished as him as
Right.
somebody who's struggling. I think that I prefer to give a lot of credit to our regular drivers and how difficult it is if you don't come up through a Formula Series similar to that, or through the road to Indy. How difficult that transition can be with this latest configuration of this aero package. And I think Jimmy Johnson would be the first one to tell you that. I think, quite frankly, his years of experience taught him to be careful pushing a car to the ragged edge. And maybe some of the young guns haven't learned that yet, or aren't fearful of that. And so, I would think the real indication of where he is in terms of progressing as an IndyCar Series driver will come next season. I think the influx of young talent, certainly Ritas VK and Pato O'Ward, and the series champion Alex Palou, gives us all the reassurance that we need that the future of open wheel racing is healthy and it's strong. And there are more stars on the horizon still coming up through the road to Indy Series. Kyle Kirkwood, I think, will be. He is, if anyone's ever had can't miss on him, it's that young man. But I also think if you look at the championship contenders, I think Joseph Newgarden, Scott Dixon, Simon Pagenaud, certainly Elio Castroneves winning an historic fourth Indianapolis 500. It indicates to me that while certainly there is some young talent, Colton Herta, another one, who are ready to take their rightful place among the all-time greats in terms of being championship contenders and contenders to win at Indy, the old guard's still not ready to ride off into the sunset. So I think that makes for a compelling start to the 2022 campaign.
And you've been around IndyCar obviously for a while in radio. Have you ever seen a season you think with more competitiveness that we had this season with, all the new drivers we're talking about, like Palou? I mean, all the first time winners. I don't know how many we had this. I think it was 3. But have you ever seen a season with this much, new competitiveness?
No, I don't think so. That's a great point, a great observation. And, the questions started to come, Scott Dixon, I believe toward the end of the season told us in a pre-race interview that he would describe this season as a blah season. Well, if you look at the success that Scott had, he won a race and he had podiums and was in championship contention almost to the next to the last race. He calls that blah. Some would call that a great season. It wasn't a championship season, which is what he's about. Joseph Newgarden in championship contention right up to the final weekend mathematically, but certainly his season got off to a disastrous start at Barber Motorsports Park, which may very well have cost him a championship. And when you think of that in totality, that in of itself, I think, gives you an idea just how competitive this series is. There's nothing wrong with Will Power. There was nothing wrong with Simon Pagenaud. nothing wrong with Alexander Rossi. It's just the margin of error is so very, very, very razor thin that now more than any other time, it doesn't necessarily take race wins to win championships. It's just a matter of being consistent. And rather than avoiding race wins, you need to avoid DNFs, because those are going to seriously cost you an opportunity to win the championship, even if it's only one or two.
Yeah, I felt Dixon saying that season was blowout. I kind of grasp what he says in terms of they were fast.
Yeah.
But they were not Palou fast, race fast. They were just off, and I don't know where. I'm sure they didn't know where to put their thumb on it. You'd watch him, and it's like, okay, he's always in the mix, but it's always maintaining or dropping back a little bit instead of that charge to the front. It's like he was having a hard time charging to the front when he had to.
Well, I think, if I may, one of the things that I think has led to him winning multiple championships is the fact that, Scott Dixon, quite frankly, when there were times when he did not have the car to charge to the front, he was smart enough to bring it home and get podiums and get top 5 finishes. But again, I mean, you talk about perhaps maybe a bit of an off year, and maybe it was an off year by Scott Dixon standards, but I think still as a race team, with the effort that was undertaken to get Jimmy Johnson up to speed, and I still believe that progress was made.
I agree.
And 3 guys in the top 5 in points in your series champion Palou, and then Dixon, and then what a season Marcus Ericsson had. I mean, I'm telling you, basically from the Indianapolis 500 on, there wasn't a more consistent driver in the NTT IndyCar Series than Marcus Ericsson. And I mean, he has officially arrived as a contender. So I think in that regard, Scott's disappointed because, he didn't win the 500, disappointed that he didn't win another championship. But I think as the offseason progresses, I think when you add Alex Palou finishing runner-up in the 500, which a lot of people forget about, and winning a championship, I think there's a lot of things for Chip and his organization to feel very, very good about, probably better than anyone else in the NTT IndyCar Series in terms of, momentum carrying them into 2022.
I absolutely agree. And I agree with the Jimmy Johnson point. At the end of the year, he was racing against guys who've been in the series for, 2, 3, 4, 5 years or longer. And, he's passing guys like Hinchcliffe and at certain races. And so, I don't know what more you could really want. He's just, and if you ever paid attention to him, he's not the kind of personality, even when he ran NASCAR, who's just going to jump out and really do something crazy. He's going to sneak up on it.
Yeah.
And I felt that's how he approached the IndyCar season, was sneaking up on it. And which I think is a smart way to do it. And it's a lot harder racing. I mean, it's just a different discipline. That's what I should say. Like, he could charge the corner so much harder than he was used to. He can get back in the throttle so much harder than he was used to. And I think he just had to break a lot of old habits. And I think by the end of the year he did. So, and people forget about some of those qualifying days. He's jumping in and out of the top 12 at certain tracks. So,
yeah. And I think next year, like I said, I think he gets an opportunity to do some testing, take part in spring training before the season gets started. I think we'll see some marked improvements in terms of Jimmy Johnson and what the future holds for him. I know Chip is all in on him. I know he's got guys like Scott Dixon and Scott Pruitt and Dario Franchitti, who are guiding his fortunes. The well-publicized picture from last year of him and Rick Mears together having conversations. And so, I do think that all the pieces are in place for him to be successful. And there are going to be varying definitions as to what successful is. Is he going to contend for a championship ever? Probably not. Going to contend for multiple race wins? Probably not. But I don't know that that's necessarily right now what drives him. I think marked and measured improvement is what drives him, and I think that's where he stands.
And at the end of the year,
I agree. I'm so sorry. I just also want to say this one thing about Jimmy Johnson. By having him come in I've said this many times, a rising tide raises all boats. Carvana activates every race, every week on social media. So, I mean, Jimmy Johnson in IndyCar has been a boon for the series. So, anybody wants to kind of complain about his driving style, or, not his style, but his performance, they need to also kind of look at what he's done for the series as well, because he probably more than any other driver has been really out in the commercial world.
Yeah.
I mean, they have really pushed him and pushed IndyCar racing, and man, I mean, that is huge in my book.
I think two of the guys that certainly brought a lot of eyes to the NTT IndyCar Series, both nationally and internationally, that otherwise might not have ever dipped their toe in the water, if you will, and looked at the NTT IndyCar Series. Certainly, he and Romain Grosjean. I mean, with the success that he had with Dale Coyne, and now stepping into that very successful 28 team, replacing Ryan Hunter-Reay, and that DHL sponsorship. It's great that they believe in Andretti Autosport and believe in the series and are going to stay with it. I think both guys went a long way toward, I think upping the interest and upping the, certainly our numbers from a listener standpoint. And certainly I think those two played a huge role in the best year in terms of television ratings in recent memory.
I agree. And I'm so sorry, Aaron, please go on with your question you had earlier. I'm sorry.
You're good. I was going to make a couple observations about Jimmy. First off, the Carvana commercials, I don't think there's ever been a commercial that's been played more. You would see 2 or 3 of those like in the same like string of commercials. It was insane. So they're definitely putting the money in. It's good. It's definitely good to see, the awareness. And for example, like my girlfriend, her family doesn't know anything about racing. They don't care about racing, but she was telling me like, oh, we were watching TV and, Jimmy Johnson commercial came up. So I thought of you. So it's good that, I think it's bringing a lot more, awareness to sport, like you were saying.
Yep.
And also I remember end of the year, they had, I don't know where this was. It might have been the Star or Racer. They had a comparison of Jimmy's year. It was like a graphic and it showed like his progression through the year with lap times. And it was a significant improvement. And I know there were a couple people on like social media that were kind of giving Jimmy a hard time. And surprisingly, Jimmy actually responded to them. There was a guy who said something like, you imagine being an 8-time or 7-time NASCAR champion and, barely being able to finish an IndyCar race. And Jimmy actually commented and said, could you imagine actually doing something out of your comfort zone? So I really, admire that from Jimmy, that he's willing to really address that head on.
Absolutely.
And and I think another thing looking forward to 2022 will be Jimmy running the 500. I mean, obviously it's not concrete yet, but it definitely looks like it's going to happen. And he definitely knows how to get around the track. So I definitely think he'll be, more competitive there. I don't know if he'll necessarily be in the running to win the race, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was. I mean, we saw like Kurt Busch. I mean, look how good Kurt Busch was.
Well, that was a different car, and I'll say that. It was a different car.
Right.
It had more downforce in it, and I think that makes a huge difference for those guys. And he will find, I think, and what they'll coach him up on, is that I think the line in a Cup car is very, very different than the line in an Indy car. I mean, I know he knows the racetrack, but it races vastly different. At least that's what everyone whose knowledge and wisdom that I respect has told me. I don't know that for sure, but everyone, and for years in the media guide, Robbie Gordon, for one, actually got with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway media relations department, and actually, they had a diagram of the different lines around the track between an IndyCar Series car and a Cup car. And I will say this, I think he'll have a pretty good idea when they test as to what his feeling is about it. And let's face it, he's got nothing else to prove. And if he's not comfortable with it, I think Jimmy Johnson is going to do what's best for Jimmy Johnson. And if that means that, for the month of May, you hand that off to Tony Kanaan for the Indy 500, then that's kind of what I expect him to do. I mean, I found some of his comments after his test with Grosjean interesting. And I think he's intrigued, but as you suggest, he's certainly not sold yet. I don't think, at least that's what I gathered from his comments when the test was over. So, but at least he's intrigued, because this time a year ago, when this all started to come together, I mean, it was an absolute no, not going to do it. Yeah. And at least now that interest is there, and it would be a cool story for sure. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see him do well in it for sure.
And that was the same case for Grosjean as well. I mean, he was absolutely no ovals at all, and that changed completely. 360 degrees, like you said with Jimmy as well.
Yep, I think that one of the things that helps Grosjean moving forward is the fact that I think he's very well aware of the success that team he's with has had at the Indianapolis 500. And he knows that next year, running the 500, he'll be able to do so in a car that gives him a chance to win. And I don't think there's any way either one of those guys are still considering it if they had not had a chance to be there on race day this year. I just think it bit them. I really do. And I think that it's something that now that they've been there, they want to be a part of it. And we've all fell victim to that at one time or another.
That's right. So, we've all of us are talking about, hey, Andretti looks like he's poised to buy the F1 team. Colton Herta, most certainly the guy to go over and run. But with Roman taking over the DHL car, and now all of a sudden he drives for Andretti, doing 2-3 years, does he then go back to F1?
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate question, and I would think that would be a possibility if it weren't to the fact that he has become so enamored with being in the United States and being in the NTT IndyCar Series. See, for guys like Colton and Pato, they have no idea what that's like. They have no experience with it. They've never been in that position before. Grosjean has been in that position before. And, he's moved his family here. He bought the RV. He traveled all over the Midwest. And I just think at this stage of his career, he's all in on seeing just where this ride with Andretti Autosport will take him, especially after the success he had this year with Dale Coyne. I just think for Pato, obviously, it's been a lifelong goal of his. It's been a career goal of his, and understandably so, much like others. I mean, while Elio is proud of being a 4-time Indy 500 champion, once upon a time, you could bet he wanted to be an F1 driver. Same thing with Kanad and even Scott Dixon and others. Just didn't materialize for whatever the reason. If that opportunity presents itself for Pato Award, I mean, there was a well-documented post that he put, the other day on social media where he had the opportunity to sit in one of Lewis Hamilton's championship cars. And I mean, he was as giddy as any kid I've ever seen at Disney World. That's for darn sure. And that's understandable. And, my concern is with Pato and Herta is that we run the risk of losing two very talented young guns who, as I said, in my opinion, are the future of our branch of the sport. But you have to be happy for them if they get the opportunity, and that's what they want to do. And we'll have other. I mean, the sport survived the retirement of Floyd and Mears and the Unsers and Michael and Mario and when Sam Hornicks Jr. and it will continue to survive. But I'm a little less concerned about IndyCar NASCAR doubleheaders. I'm a little less concerned about that and the overall impact from a negative perspective on drivers and teams than I am, intertwining Formula One and IndyCar because of the opportunity for drivers here to go to F1.
Yeah, I fully understand what you're saying about Colton and Pato. I'm the same as you on that. I'd hate to lose them, but if you're good, you're good.
Yeah.
If you get your opportunities, you get your opportunities. So
well, and I've had friends of mine in the sport who were very, very happy with race teams and very successful with race teams. And then Roger Penske picks up the phone and calls, and as much as they hated to leave, they had to leave because it was Roger Penske. I mean, that's like signing with the New York Yankees in baseball, or signing with the LA Lakers in basketball. Loyalty's one thing, but the chance to be a part of, fulfill a dream, whatever the case may be, however you want to label it, it's something that you got to respect and understand for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Absolutely.
So another. Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Go ahead. I was going to say I was going to ask you if you were doing the next question.
Yeah. So my other question or topic was, and we've kind of talked about this. What do you think the biggest disappointment was of the season? Maybe just due to what people's expectations were. And for me, I think that would either be probably Dixon, and kind of his struggles throughout the season. Obviously Penske was kind of hit or miss. Definitely at Indy would probably, definitely be in there for that.
I know what his expectation level is. I really do, but I'm not ready to label this season as a struggle for Dixon. I'm just not. I think Scott Dixon, but if nothing else, fell victim to, the most competitive season in recent memory. And I think, there've been other seasons when perhaps what he did this year would have resulted in a championship, and for whatever the reason, it just didn't. And certainly Penske had their share of struggles, but still, again, had Joseph Newgarden in the championship hunt all the way to the end, which again, an indication of just how incredibly competitive it is. But for me, and I don't think anyone's more disappointed than he, going into the season, Alexander Rossi was asked about the expectation level. And the expectation level was, he said himself, anything less than a championship is unacceptable. And the opportunity to do that went away pretty early. Some of it, quite frankly, due to unforced errors. Some of it due to things that were totally and completely out of his control. I don't think that anyone went into this season because of how close he came to winning a championship over the past couple of years. Nobody went into this season with more of a personal expectation level than Alexander Rossi. And a lot of folks, including me, the last 2 years have labeled him as the favorite to win the championship. And I don't know if it's something where he needs to take a look inward, or it's a conversation he needs to have with Michael. But certainly I think that nobody puts, again, more pressure on Alexander Rossi than Alexander Rossi. And I think he's one of those guys that is really hopeful of a tremendous rebound, because this season, based upon the last few, was very Alexander Rossi-like. I mean, I don't know. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I think it's the fewest laps he's led since he's been in the series. And, really was not in contention for a win more often than not. And that was, quite frankly, a big surprise.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. He just all. I mean, you can just see it. He's just out of sync somehow, some way. It's so strange. If you think back, there was all that talk of him going to Penske, a couple years ago, and it seems like ever since then, it just hasn't been quite the same for him. And I don't know. Maybe it's a coincidence. I mean, it could just very well be a coincidence.
Well, I will say this. There's a lot of things internally. I think oftentimes those of us who speak on such things, what we know is exceeded only by what we don't know.
Exactly.
In terms of the inner workings of that race team. They don't always publicize engineers who retire. They don't always publicize, people in the shock program that change teams. If you look at the totality of Andretti Autosport, really, other than Colton Herta, there wasn't a lot to write home about there. Of course, they have a technical alliance with Myers Shank, and I think Jack had a season for them that Jack would label as disappointing based upon what they had done. Now, granted, they did, take home the Indianapolis 500 and Elio's fourth, but I think it's interesting that this conversation is happening about Michael perhaps moving toward F1. When some would suggest that, with the changes in the driver roster that have been announced and others that are going to be announced, and given the totality of the year that they had as an organization, they would be going down this road. But I'm sure, look, Michael is an immensely successful car owner and team owner. He knows the business like the back of his hand. Rob Edwards, their president, well respected, been around it in many levels, and I'm sure they'll get the ship going in the right direction. But it's interesting that this F1 thing continues to be a part of the conversation, and I hope that at the same time conversations are occurring that will get that team in totality back, to more of a consistent level in terms of their competitiveness next season.
Well, definitely Herta. I mean, he was the star shining moment of that team this year because, Hinchcliffe, that was kind of a surprise to me, just that they were kind of not in the hunt most of the year.
Yep.
And I really found that kind of shocking. And then Ryan Hunter-Reay has more bad luck.
For sure.
I mean, of course, they always say luck is what you make of it. It just seems like he's always in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And Rossi, like you said, some of it was just unforced errors, and some of it was just mechanical gremlin. I don't know. It's a really strange dynamic there right now. And I'm like you. I kind of don't know what to think of the F1 deal other than the fact that it looks like it's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's an opportunity there. Certainly, I think the money's well documented, and the opportunity to make money in motorsports is there for sure. I mean, it takes a hefty initial investment, and it takes a continued investment to run week in and week out, a staggering amount of money that guys like us can't even fathom. But
right.
I think it indicates to me, again, I've said this for a number of years, especially once upon a time when, people forget that, there was a period of time there that if it weren't for Michael and Sam Schmidt, Indy Lights, quite frankly, wouldn't have existed. I mean, they carried the note on the majority of the cars that competed in that series, race in and race out for a number of years. And there was a period of time there when Michael had cars in all three levels of the road to Indy, and in the IndyCar Series itself. And there are a lot of business holdings that people aren't aware of outside of the winery and the go-kart facilities and some of the other. And I've always said that Michael, I don't think perhaps gets enough credit for being the astute businessman that he is. And while certainly the quote-unquote Andretti curse is well documented at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway from a driver's perspective, I think Michael, history has shown, is as successful of an owner. There's Roger Penske successful at the Indianapolis 500, but then after that you start looking at other teams and some of the success that they've had over the years. And I think going back 105 years, I think you got to put Andretti Autosport or Andretti Green Racing. I think you got to put Michael's name in the conversation with some of the most successful owners ever at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for sure. Guys, I can tell you, I remember. Aaron, you're too young. I probably have things in my closet behind me older than you. But I'm telling you, when AGR had the late Dan Weldon and Dario and TK and Herta, they did not make it a lot of fun for everybody else, and they had a lot of fun. And those guys were a hell of a lot of fun to follow for sure. And that was an impressive run that those guys put together there for a few years for sure.
Oh, I definitely remember that. I'm definitely not yet too young for that.
You look young. Racing hasn't made you look as old as it makes me look, I guess. So good for you.
They how many 500 wins does Michael have, I wonder?
I know you're going to ask me that.
It's got to be 5 or 6, right?
It's up around there, 5, 6, or 7 for sure. I guess
Weldon,
if I was in the middle of the season, or if I had Donald Davidson close to me, I would be able to ask the question again.
Roger has 17, I think, right?
Yeah, that's a bizarre number for sure. But I mean, you've got Dan, you've got Dario. Like two of Dario's 3 wins came with Andretti. Did one come with Chip?
2 came with Chip. Dario.
2 come with Chip.
2 came with Chip. Okay. Yeah. So and the list goes on and on and on. I mean, it's pretty. Ryan Hunter-Reay, of course.
Rossi.
Yeah. So that's
just 5 wins in.
Yeah,
so I think Michael's just got 5.
And even if it's only 5, that's still
a lot more.
One impressive for sure. So
that's impressive. You think that Roger had basically a 20-year head start on him?
Yeah.
Really in the car owner field. So I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Sure is, for sure.
And I guess the thing that doesn't make the whole it's still drastic because Andretti going to F1, but I mean they've been involved with Formula Atlantic. I remember they were doing the rallycross stuff, the global rallycross.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they were doing what's that
truck? They had an electric racing team. I think they have the Formula car too, and now they're doing the truck.
I don't know if are they doing the truck now?
I thought they did. Maybe not. Maybe
Chip's doing it. Chip's doing it.
Well, suffice it to say that in his years as an owner, he's got a very diverse portfolio. So his interest in that form of racing is certainly not a surprise. I mean, obviously he has a history as a driver there. His father has a storied history for sure as a Formula One driver, and many in motorsports, and I mean others the Indy 500, and it's its own entity. But there are many, especially if you're an open wheel racer, that you see Formula One as the pinnacle of motorsports. And, I think, again, he's a smart businessman. And if it makes sense for him to proceed in that direction, then that's probably what he'll do. So
he might feel like he has some unfinished business there, too.
Could be. Yeah, could be.
Because I've never really read what his true thoughts were on it, if he's ever said, but I don't think he got a completely fair shake when he went to F1. I mean, that's kind of,
many of that there have been programs in place. Scott Speed, for instance, a driver development program that was designed to create that pipeline to take an American driver right to Formula One, and obviously that didn't pan out, and it's not something that is usually turned out to be successful from a driver's perspective, for a driver to by and large leave here and go there and enjoy any measure of success. And it's very political. I think the Netflix series has given a lot of Americans some tremendous and some fascinating insight into the inner workings of the sport, and just how competitive it can be. And for a guy like Grosjean, I mean, he basically is echoing the same sentiments that I remember Rubens Barrichello echoing when he came over for a year. He said, they went to the test in Sebring, and Kanaan said, hey, you want to go out to eat after we get done with the test? There's a little seafood restaurant here in town. And he's like, yeah. So he said, I thought it would just be me and TK. And he said, I walk in and there's like 7, 8, 9 drivers there, all from different race teams. And he said, that's not done in Formula One. It's just not. Oh. And so, it's a totally different mindset. It's a totally different approach. It's a totally different world. I mean, I remember when the U.S. Grand Prix came to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, we did the races on the radio network. We were not allowed in the media center. We were there covering the broadcast on radio, and we're not allowed in the media center. I parked at 16th and Lyndhurst, about 9 blocks from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, because I didn't have a parking pass. The local news media in Indianapolis, they were on a flatbed trailer on where is now the roundabout, where the old, I think, one of the old restaurants used to be, like the White Castle, and they had to shoot all of their video from that flatbed trailer, and any race highlights they used had to be stock video issued to them by Formula One. So it's a world that if you've not ever been up close to it, you've not seen it. It's unlike anything else in the world for sure. But again, I think Michael has proven very adept at surrounding himself with the people he needs to surround himself with to make him successful. And if he decides to venture into Formula One, I think he'll do the same thing. This is not a fly by the seat of your pants decision for sure.
No,
it's a well calculated, well thought out plan, and if it comes to fruition, I think it'll be interesting to see what impact it might have on the NTT IndyCar Series driver roster moving forward, for sure.
Yeah, and it may be a two-way street, though. I mean, you may get young guys coming over that are in their pipeline, and then they come over and run a little bit, and they go back, and
yep.
I mean, who knows? It could go a zillion different ways. It is just an interesting thing to see and to watch, and I mean, in the amount of money that supposedly is involved in it is. I couldn't conceive of that kind of money. I mean,
it's more than we'll see ever. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm sure Mario, I mean, definitely has something to do with this. And I know that, it says Michael, but I'm sure, Mario's definitely got some persuasion behind it. Or, I was joking with Scott, maybe Mario, wouldn't be surprised if Mario got back in an F1 car, at least for a test or something. I mean, he's definitely not, as you were saying, we talked to him and, he said he has not given up anything.
Yeah, well, I would say this, much like I think Roger Penske being at the helm of the NTT IndyCar Series, I do think that there are boardrooms and meetings and audiences that Mario would give Michael access to that he otherwise may not have access to. And I think in that regard, he could be a very valuable asset for Michael.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the same is true of Roger and his stewardship of the IndyCar Series and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I think Roger can get you into boardrooms and get you meetings that maybe the previous ownership did not have access to. So there are some factors in place that will benefit Michael in this process moving forward. I think if he decides,
it's going to be interesting to see how Roger taking over Indy Lights changes the dynamic there a little bit. They hired Levi Jones to. I don't know what capacity he's in the upper management of the series, and
he's going to oversee the series. I mean,
he's overseeing the whole thing.
That's going to be under his direction for sure. And I mean, I think Roger has made it very clear, and I think one of the things that'll be interesting to see if he's one of the some might use the phrase "physician heal thyself." Does that mean Penske now is going to have cars in Indy Lights? And I think that's his goal. I mean, I think he wants to encourage more participation and more involvement by NTT IndyCar Series teams in that series. And I think, again, I continue to say that one of the things that I think is missed in all of this is certainly it's provided a lot of opportunities for drivers. But it's also provided opportunities not only for team members and crew chiefs and engineers and mechanics, but it's also provided opportunities for race teams to move up through the road to Indy and then join the NTT IndyCar Series, which I think is really cool. And I think, the biggest issue in my mind in talking, for instance, to our Rob Howden and talking to others who have, wanted to involve themselves in the series, bottom line is this: they've got to try to find a way, I think, to make it a bit more affordable and make it more attractive to race teams. I think that's the biggest issue right now, more than anything else. Is it takes a pretty healthy investment for that series, and maybe the reinstitution of a dedicated purse, if possible, with some title sponsorship. Because right now you're essentially week in and week out, you're racing for that scholarship at the end of the season. That only goes to one guy. So that's a heck of an investment, which it'll pay off if you win the scholarship. But unfortunately, for 12 or 13 other cars, they don't have a shot at that. I do like the formula with the chassis. the fact that a few years ago they got rid of that old Dallara chassis that was never meant to turn right and left, because I think there were a number of drivers that all of a sudden it made sense for them to run multiple years in Indy Lights, whereas before you really didn't learn anything more by running multiple seasons in Indy Lights. So maybe if you fell short of a championship, you can come back the next year and win one. You had drivers leave and come back. Sebastian Saavedra comes to mind as a guy who did that once upon a time. So I think everything is there. At least the bones of the structure are really, really solid. I think the other two, the feeder series, the Indy Pro and the USF 2000s will continue to run in unison a lot with the NTT IndyCar Series, and I think that pipeline will only grow stronger and get better. And even with all of the difficulties and the woes, it's still been a pretty daggone good pipeline to lead you to the NTT IndyCar Series. And we've seen the benefit of what that series has done in terms of making the top level of the series, of the ladder, as successful and competitive as it is, for sure.
I agree. I was at USF 2000 team shop the other day, and we were just talking. They all have to get new tubs for next year because the old tub, they can't do the halo on them.
Right.
The way the halo they're using isn't made to fit on that tub. So they're getting all new tubs, but all the bolt-on pieces are the same. So good. That's good.
Yep.
And they had, I guess, I didn't really know much about them until I was talking to them. And they had Indy Lights teams in the past, and they said it just got so unaffordable.
Right.
They just quit doing it.
Right.
And I know Hukos had the same complaint, where he said some of the items were costing more than what they were getting on what charged for the IndyCar.
Right.
And so hopefully somehow or another they can get that cost down. I don't know how they do it, because you have, I believe just one manufacturer and they control the whole thing and all that. So hopefully Indy Lights can get their costs down. Hopefully the cost of the new tubs isn't cost prohibitive for the USF 2000 for the next few years. For some of those teams, although it seems to me, just after talking to them, which I didn't know a lot about that series, that most of the teams have 3 to 4 cars. Just talking to them.
Well, I think
a lot of them,
the longer a chassis is in existence, obviously the cost goes down. The more years you can use it.
Right.
Excuse me. The cost containment comes from the update kits when it comes time for those. But I think that those lower rungs have hit on something where the chassis is essentially the same, and you're looking at the drivetrain and the power plant as the only thing you change from one level to the next. That strongly encourages teams to be involved in more than one level of the series. And I don't know, some people have said, well, why can't you just take old DW12 chassis and make those your Indy Lights cars? Well, because as time goes by, the last thing you'd want to do is put a young driver in a chassis that was the same chassis that James Hinchcliffe or Sebastian Bourdais were injured in. You want to make sure that you have, above all else, the safety improvements for those cars each year. And each year, safety improvements are made to those cars. And you want to make sure you have the safest and best car out there for them to drive. And I think that's what's driven a lot of that, and why, some maybe never got the answer to that question is, why don't you, you've got all these old cars out there, why don't you just run them? Well, it's not as simple as that from a safety perspective, for sure. But I think it was good news. I think it was universally applauded, and I think it'll continue to grow and prosper. There's no question that from a growth standpoint, it's been fairly stagnant for a while. And I say that, and I don't say that as a slight to Dan Anderson and his organization, because I think at the end of the day, and again, I'm not on the inside, I don't know for sure, but I know this, had Dan Anderson not come along and taken control of that series, it very well may have just simply gone away. I think the series is grateful to him for his commitment. and what he's been able to accomplish with growth with the other two rungs on that ladder. And I think we can be thankful over the last 10 years, especially, that it existed because of some of the very talented drivers that we've been able to watch grow, literally. I mean, this is akin when the whole series, the whole Road to Indy series is at a place like Mid-Ohio. And I think we talked about this last time. What you're seeing is akin to going to a Reds game, and before the Reds take the field, you see a single A game, a double A game, and a triple A game, and then the Reds come out and play. I mean, that's essentially what you're seeing. And I know of no other sport, and certainly no other form of motorsport, where you can see essentially all four rungs on the ladder on display in the same weekend. And in some weekends, you go a little bit lower than that, now that karting's tied to it, and you've seen, the 9, 10, 11-year-old kids, and they can see exactly where they want to go and how they can get there. And I think I've always found that to be a very cool aspect of this entire program.
I absolutely agree. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, no, I've never thought of it like that. So we were talking about, obviously, what Alexander Rossi would probably say was a disappointing season for him. Someone else who kind of started out, and when I actually look, so Will Power, he was finishing kind of around Rossi in most of the races. And I know when Will Power finally won at the Indy GP, and it was August, right? Got my months mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, August. Yeah. He in the media center, he was FaceTiming Rossi, and Rossi was like, "You finally broke our bad luck." But talking about bad luck, have you ever seen anyone, Mark, have more bad luck than Will Power did at Detroit?
No, and for Will, it seems like this happens every other year. So, conventional wisdom tells you that next year things will come together for Will. I do know this, with the success that Will has had in his career, with his wins and certainly all of his polls, which is an astronomical number. His percentage in terms of his starts and sitting on pole is absolutely unbelievable. He's among the all-time greats in terms of qualifying. In terms of laps led, again, the staggering numbers for Will Power. But I think the thing that because of being a series champion and because of winning an Indy 500, I think Will is a little better equipped mentally to handle the frustrations of a year like this, and know he's with a team that week in and week out is going to give him an opportunity to win. And, when you are stricken with bad luck for whatever the reason, as you said, there's adages in sports about luck is that, the harder I work, the luckier I seem to get. And, luck is the residue of preparation. And yeah, I get that. But, when you have an ill-timed caution come out and you pull on pit road and you have a mechanical failure and your car won't restart. I mean, that's just lady luck not smiling upon you. And, Will had certainly his share of that throughout the season. But, as frustrated and as aggravated as he was, he never backed away from it. And again, I think by the time next season rolls around, with the success that he's had in the past and pretty consistent success, I would expect a strong season in 2022 from Will Power for sure. And, he's become a lot more outgoing, a lot more affable. I mean, the guy was always a bit of an introvert, and really the only time you ever wanted to talk to him is when he was on pole or when he won a race, because he just didn't have a lot to say. But
I don't know, the hot tub interview and some of those interviews are pretty entertaining.
well, it's a different Will Power now than it was.
Right. No, you're right.
That's what I'm saying. That success, he's gotten more comfortable. He's become more active on social media, a heavy contributor to Twitter, and his sense of humor has come out. And quite frankly, while certainly he always gives straightforward, honest, and open answers, I will say that Will has become very entertaining when things are going well for him, for sure.
And something we learned about the Detroit deal, and I didn't realize this, and this may be insider information, I'm not sure, but the whole ECU thing. So apparently the series was trying something different on his car and his car only. and they figured out obviously there was a
Well,
problem.
I think it was Chevy. I don't think it was a series. I think it was Chevy was
Okay.
just trying something different, and the way he shut the car down wouldn't allow the car to restart.
Well, I would venture to guess that it was something along those lines because how many cars were in that race?
Right.
And the rest of them restarted.
Yeah, and that's what
Yeah.
was what he was saying, that he goes, I didn't even know about it, and he said, wait, the way I shut the car down was in the wrong sequence. Essentially, I don't want to speak for him, but.
Well, just again, ill-timed caution, ill-timed red flag, ifs and buts, and you'd be hard pressed to find a driver, perhaps in the top 10 in points, who probably wouldn't look at a race during the season much in the same way that Will Power looked at that race in Detroit and said, "Boy, if this hadn't have happened, where might I have been? I could have ended up top 5 in points." So. But again, to our earlier point, when we talked about the season and how very competitive it is and how very competitive it was, just one single solitary mistake like that can really get you second guessing yourself, especially if you take a big points hit and take yourself. I mean, to think that you might be out of contention for a championship after, leaving Detroit. I mean, that's a bitter pill to swallow for guys that are ultra competitive with everything that they do, for sure.
I agree. Speaking of Detroit, and we had a conversation about Detroit last time you were here. We were talking about Belle Isle and all that, and all of a sudden it's going back to one race, and we're not going to run Belle Isle anymore after this year, right?
I think one more year on Belle Isle, and I think, quite frankly, each and every year it becomes more and more difficult to race there. There is a group of folks who, for whatever the reason, don't think that's a good idea, despite the fact that I think Penske Entertainment has pumped over $13 million in improvements into that facility. And each year we go back there, we see something that they've done, that they've fixed. And the thing is about Penske Entertainment is, even if it ends up back downtown on a temporary street course, I think they'll continue their commitment to Belle Isle. That's the type of organization they are. But I would say this, having been there, logistically, it's difficult. I mean, there's not much parking. There's motor coaches, dozens of motor coaches, literally dozens of motor coaches that have to be employed. They're just it can be difficult for us to navigate our way around. It can be difficult for the drivers and the teams. I mean, they made tremendous improvements in the paddock with all of the concrete that they poured and whatnot, but still, logistically, it's not ideal. And quite frankly, from a surface standpoint, it's punishing for the drivers, physically, mentally, and emotionally punishing. And I think that's indicated by the fact that, it's not a doubleheader anymore, because it's just it's too hard on the equipment, but more importantly, it's too hard on the drivers. And so I know that if this is the farewell to Belle Isle for the NTT IndyCar Series, I think when everyone loads up and pulls off of that island for the last time, I think everyone associated with the series and Penske Entertainment, Bud Denker, and their outstanding organization can feel like that they certainly have left that place in a much better way than which they found it. And I hope that they'll be proud of that for many, many years to come.
Well, they made it so nice now that nobody wants them there.
That's true.
Well, and again, there has been that faction, and we've seen that over the past few years, especially. But I really think more than anything else, and I'm not saying a street circuit logistically is a piece of cake. I mean, they found that out in Nashville this year. And there have been issues at Toronto. You remember how quickly Baltimore came and went, and other races that were supposed to happen that never happened. Street courses, by and large, are difficult. Not all enjoy the continuity and the relationship with government that the folks at Long Beach and St. Pete enjoy. It'd be nice if all of them did. And I think by and large, the relationship is really good with the city of Toronto for that event. But logistically, those events are very, very difficult. And, I think that I think some of the renderings I've seen and the proposals for the new course through downtown Detroit, it promises to be an interesting event for sure.
So we're talking about street courses. And I definitely think one of the most anticipated races of this year was definitely the Nashville street course. What was your thoughts on that race, Mark? I know, I mean, obviously, like I said, there was, I don't know the number, but I know there was tons of people there. All the merchandise was sold out. But obviously I heard there were some issues with, like some of the stands weren't put together and some management issues. I know there's a lot of upset people, and I would have been upset too, that paid a lot of money to get into the paddock, because me and my dad were actually going to go to the race, but a paddock pass was like, I mean, you had to buy a suite pass. It was like $1,000 to even get in the paddock. And apparently I know Friday and Saturday, they were just letting anyone and everyone into the paddock. So obviously there was a lot of mad people about that. But what was your thoughts about the event?
I think, and again, this falls in line with my earlier comments about a street race. When you have a new one, you got to have one to know what's right and what's wrong. And I think that's what it took. And clearly there were some logistic issues, especially with folks who had bought a weekend pass. Might have been a grandstand, and I don't know, turn 6 or one of the grandstands, might have been grandstand 6, was not, constructed in time for people to sit there until either late Saturday or early Sunday. And that was the supplier issue as much as anything. I think given what we all deal with in our day-to-day lives, thanks to this pandemic, I'd like to think that we could relate to that a little bit, because we're still a long way from being normal. I think there are some clear issues with the racetrack that need to be addressed and need to be corrected. I think that reared its head during the race, but I think all in all, given the support that the city gave it and some of the high-profile folks that were involved in the promotion of it, namely Big Machine Records, Scott Borchetta and his organization, I think that it's poised for long-term success. And I think that it's one of the great cities in America, Nashville, Tennessee. It's certainly a destination for a lot of people in the Midwest for other reasons. And I think it's a perfect time of the year for it. And I think whatever issues there were, I think the postmortem continues on the event. And I'm sure that plans are being made by all involved to hopefully make things go much, much smoother for fans and teams and everyone involved next year. But I think all in all, I think you got to give it pretty high marks, because it's a massive undertaking. And in terms of how the cars perform and how they're going to handle the turns and the straightaways in some areas of the course, you can't test there. And when it's a new event like that, you don't know until you get one under your belt. And now that they've got one under their belt, they'll be able to, I think, make the necessary improvements and make it a better experience for everyone. And I think despite the difficulties that some had and the issues that some had, I think you'll probably see another spectacular crowd there, not only next year, but for the foreseeable future. Because, again, they have a great partner, great title sponsor. The city is all in. And the right people are all in, and you combine that with the efforts of the NTT IndyCar Series, and I think it's poised for long-term success. I mean, we talked to their promoter, and we even talked to Bud Dinker from the Detroit Grand Prix and Penske Entertainment at the Indianapolis 500, and we asked Bud about that race in Nashville that was coming up, and Bud said, "Well, we have a binder that is essentially our Bible for this event." And we essentially handed that over to the people in Nashville and said, this is what we do. This is how we do it. These are some of our recommendations. And I think they got that same level of support from Green Savory. They got that same level of support from the folks at Worldwide Technology Raceway and all of the promoters in the NTT IndyCar Series, because they all understand it's important for each and every one of them to succeed throughout the course of the year, for sure.
I agree. I would tell you, right before Aaron asked that question, or he didn't ask a question before he mentioned Nashville, I was going to say, I'm going to, make the hot take. I thought Nashville has the bones to be a great event.
Yeah, sure.
And it just needs to be adjusted. I don't know what they can't do, obviously. But people got to realize that just because that's the way the track layout was this year, it can be a little different next year. They can change this, that, and the other. So I mean, it seemed to me like the fans were really, you got to go where the fans want you, I believe. And you got to try to make that work. It's like when they were talking about doing double headers. I would, somewhere like Barber's a place that really wants Indy cars, right? I mean, and maybe I'm overreaching here a little bit, but if, last year when they were talking about doing double headers, I was like, man, I'd rather see a couple of races at Barber than maybe some other places because they really want Indy cars.
Well, I think what it boils down to, and this, people all the time they're talking about the schedule. I'd love to see us go back to Kentucky, or I'd love to see us go back. I don't understand why we're looking at going to the street course in Detroit, Michigan. If we're going to leave Belle Isle, why don't we just go 50 minutes to the west of Michigan International? Well, yeah, we've tried that, and for whatever the reason, and I don't know. I maintain this, and this is, again, I don't have any intimate knowledge of this. This is just from my 26 years of experience. When I drive around the roundabout outside of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in early summer, and I see a billboard on the side of the USAC building advertising the race at Gateway, at Worldwide Technology Raceway, and I see what the Bommarito Automotive Group does and what that group does in terms of their activation, and what Nashville does and what Detroit does. What it boils down to is title sponsor is huge, but the promoter, the track owner, has got to be all in on promoting the event. And if they're not, it's simply not going to be successful. And the races that have gone away because the promotion wasn't successful, and either a title sponsor couldn't be secured, or the title sponsor they had went away, like with SunTrust at Richmond years ago. And that's true time and time again. Do you think Iowa Speedway is even in the conversation if Hy-Vee is not invested in that? No. I mean, that's it. I mean, that's what brought it back, is Hy-Vee. And they see what other companies have done. Namely, they want to be like the Bommarito Automotive Group. And that's what brought it back. And I think you will see the same level of promotion for that event moving forward that you've seen at some of these other successful events that we've mentioned. The only thing that I would say moving forward is if, for instance, the race in Detroit, if it moves, and I know we've seen a proposed layout of the track, and I don't know, maybe this was the case and names were not named, but I know this. When there were issues with the road course at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, it was when they decided to reconfigure it. It was Dario Franchitti and Tony Kanaan and Scott Dixon who were involved heavily in that. And that's why that track races so well. Whenever I think promoters and Tony Kopman's organization and other folks, my hope is, I don't know this for sure, that whatever they decide to do in Nashville, that they let the drivers weigh in on that. I think sometimes those changes are made without driver input. We've seen drivers bemoan that fact in NASCAR, and it's taken the competition away from some of the racetracks as a result. Those are the guys that drive on it. Those are the guys with the experience. And in my opinion, those are the ones that need to have a say-so in how those track designs and those reconfigurations go, because if they're comfortable with it, they're happy with it, it makes a better product for the fans for sure.
I agree. I think that's spot on. I would say there's few exceptions to that. I would say Milwaukee, for whatever reason, they just cannot get fans anymore. And I know Andretti's tried so hard there. And
well, you can't run a race. You can't start an IndyCar race at 5:00 on a Sunday. That's all.
Well, that's true too. Yeah, that's true.
The thing that's unfortunate about Milwaukee is you're dealing with a fair board there and a fair commission.
That's right.
And so I think Michael, I think he put up a valiant effort between there and Baltimore too. I mean, let's not forget the effort that he undertook with Baltimore. But again, you were dealing with some people who, I won't say they were unscrupulous in their business, but I think the facts later, when you're not paying vendors and things of that nature, that creates an issue, and it's gonna be harmful to the long-term success of an event. So, but from what I understand, don't have confirmation on this, but when the conversation started about IndyCar returning to Road America, I believe they said, one Eastern or we don't race here. It's as simple as that, because they understand where the majority of the fan base comes from. And if you're racing in Wisconsin and you don't start till 5 o'clock on a Sunday, Eastern time, and folks are going back to Indianapolis and Illinois and places like that, and have to go through Chicago, that makes it a little tough to get back to work on Monday. So the earlier you can start on Sunday, the better off you are. So, there are many factors that are involved in scheduling. Certainly the television partners weigh in heavily upon that. But, I loved calling races in Milwaukee. It's much like Watkins Glen at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It's a living history museum for motorsports in my mind. But there were just, I think, too many decisions that were made that kind of doomed it to failure before it ever really got a chance to get legs.
People who do not deal with the fair boards and racing do not understand how difficult that can be. I mean, there's racetracks all over this country that'll, when they got one fair board, man, they're going good and this, that, and the other, and whether they get other people elected or however, their fair board works, and then all of a sudden the racing just stops. It's that way right now in Belleville, Illinois, one of the great short tracks in this country. And if you got a favorable fair board, they've got tons of races and great crowds.
I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen at the Terre Haute Action Track in the past, and
sure,
it's happened most recently at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. So
they made sure there's not going to be racing there.
That's right.
They went as far as changing the surface.
For sure.
That last Hoosier 100 was the last Hoosier 100. So
sad for sure.
Yes.
From your perspective, Mark, kind of from the radio perspective, what race do you enjoy calling ovals more? And I feel like I probably know the answer to this, but do you enjoy calling ovals more than street or road courses, or is it about the same to you?
I will say this. In the days when the Indy Racing League was an all-oval series and I was calling the backstretch with Mike King, it's the most fun I ever had doing anything in my life. There's no question about that. The decision to go road and street course racing, I was a bit skeptical. It took me actually going to a few events to get it, because they are events. It just so happens to be a race. I've become intrigued by the strategy that's involved, which is essentially, a huge part of being successful in road and street course racing is figuring out the fuel mileage and the tire management throughout the course of the weekend, and have gotten a bit more working knowledge. I don't know that the current configuration of our oval package, other than the Indianapolis 500, I don't know that. I think it needs some work. I really do. I think it needs some work, and I hope as time goes by, that work gets done, and it becomes a little more compelling, a little more competitive. I have every confidence that it will, but I know good news, bad news about being at Texas still is that too many people want to go back to the Sam Hornish Jr. days and the Buddy Lazier days and the Greg Ray days and Vitor Mira and those guys, where we had, lap after lap after lap of packs of 6, 7, 8, 9 cars. I think we've shown at places like Pocono that there's a skill set involved to racing that way. And the reason it was able to be done is obviously it was a different car, different chassis, but those drivers race that way every single week. And that's not the case anymore. And some of those drivers just aren't comfortable racing that way. And so while certainly I'm one of those, even though I've been at this for 26 years, I enjoyed that period of time. I'm thankful that I was a part of that period of time. I have no interest in going back to that type of racing at Texas. But I would like to see it be a bit more compelling and a bit more competitive. And I would like to see it be a little bit easier to pass, even at Iowa and Gateway. And I think, the difficult thing is you can't run 6 or 7 cars. You guys know this. You can't run 6 or 7 cars in a test and solve that problem. But it's too expensive to test everybody. So, maybe your wind tunnel testing can help you out in that regard. But hopefully at some point, everyone will get their heads together and at least find a way to tighten those cars up just a little bit, or at the very least make it a little bit easier to pass. I do like it. I'll make one final comment about the schedule. And we talked about this last time. Given the return of Iowa and Gateway and Texas and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and then you've got, places like Belle Isle and Nashville. And then you look at Laguna Seca and, you look at Long Beach and the list goes on and on and on. I'm sorry. I mean, no disrespect, but the champion of the NTT IndyCar Series is a true champion because he is someone that has to be successful in a bigger variety of disciplines than I think in any other form of motorsports. And yeah. I'll pretty much argue that point and I'm not saying other champions aren't deserving, but I think if you look at the totality of the types of tracks that the series runs on and the variety of them, I don't think there's any question that it takes an incredible amount of talent to win an NTT IndyCar Series championship for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think people got to understand street courses really aren't like a natural road course. I mean, it's just, it's the same, but it's different. It's a lot of blind corners. It's just different type of racing.
Braking enters into it. I mean, let's face it. When you're in a place like Barber Motorsports Park with the elevation changes, you don't get those elevation changes in a place like Long Beach. You don't get them at Nashville. And so, the weight of the car, as the fuel burns off, going up and downhill, when the car gets lighter, even at Belle Isle, there are some very small elevation changes that if you're not careful, then you climb back into the throttle off a turn too quickly, you can lose grip and the car can spin on you. But that's why I think that it's probably not accurate to say, for instance, you really can't compare Iowa to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway any more than you can compare Barber to, say, Belle Isle.
Right.
You can't make
that's well put.
You can't just lump road and street courses in together for sure because of how different all of them are.
That's well put. And kind of going back to what you're talking about, pack racing versus what they have today. I mean, you just always hope for that happy medium. We just haven't found it. I mean, we had the whatever you want to call the body work that they had there for a while. They had the covers over the wheels. It created a lot of drafting passes, and that's not always great either because once you get past, and it takes 2-3 laps to catch up. So it's almost a little bit like bicycle racing in a way, because you got the big draft and then you get past and then you're back in line and then you got to get your speed up and try to pass again.
But I'm in the minority here because if I were king for a day, we'd go back to that tomorrow because I think before we decided that for some reason we thought that we wanted people to be able to look at a Honda and tell it was a Honda or look at a shot. I mean, I don't think that win on Sunday, buy on Monday mentality has ever been accurate in open wheel racing. And I think that initial DW12 chassis provided the most compelling racing in recent memory and most competitive racing at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But more than anything else, I think it enhanced the quality of racing on road and street courses because guys could lean on one another a little bit, much more so than they can now. And I called a lot of those races when I was out on the course, and I found them to be entertaining. But when they decided to go to those aero kits the very next year, I think we ran 40 some odd laps of caution at St. Petersburg. We had pieces and parts flying up in the stands and hitting spectators. And, Michael Andretti, I think, said he shelled out over $4 million in parts over the course of a year and a half to 2 years. My opinion is it's never quite been as competitive as it was at that time. And I know this is a good looking race car. It really is. I like it a lot. But from a competitive standpoint, I was comfortable with how ugly that car was, but how well it raced overall. So for sure.
I think that's fair. I think that's very fair. For somebody, I mean, I guess for me, I look at more from. I think you're right. I guess I'm looking at a little less from a fan side. There's something about the racing that I thought was exciting, but I don't know. It was just like, I don't know. For me, it was just a little different. Maybe I can't put my thumb on it.
Well, they didn't look like the Indy cars that you and I grew up with. I mean, I think people had a hard time with that. I really did.
The looks really didn't bother me. It was just the racing was good. It was good entertainment.
Yeah.
It was just a little bit different racing than maybe I like to see. And maybe I'm just same person, but I agree wholeheartedly about the body kit era. The body kit era was a nightmare. I thought. I thought it was terrible.
Yeah. Cost a lot of teams a lot of money for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I really understand what they were trying, but in reality, it was just you have all those little parts and pieces, and man, those things ain't made for that.
Yeah.
You got to have durability. You got to have durability. So as we kind of start winding this down, well, how would you summarize this past season? I think to me personally, if I'm grading it, it's an A+ for me.
Well, it's going to be anxious. I'm going to be anxious to see how Alex Palou follows this season up. I mean, we've had guys win championships in the past and never quite be able to duplicate that season. Greg Ray comes to mind. Buddy Lazier comes to mind. I mean, I know that's going back a ways.
Sure.
But I have every reason to believe that this kid is going to be around for the foreseeable future. I liken his process to this. I mean, when Dale Coyne signed him, I, along with everyone else, said, who? And then when Ganassi signed him during the last offseason, I was like, what? And now I say, wow. I mean, so he's gone from who to what to wow for me anyway. And I can tell you this, folks, it's not an act. He's as genuine as in some respects, and I don't want to put any pressure on him, but in some respects, he reminds me of a young Elio Castroneves. I think he is legit. I don't think he turns anything on for the camera. I think he's incredibly talented, and I think it's one of those instances, and you guys have both seen it, it's the right guy in the right place at the right time. And sometimes you strike lightning in a bottle. Sometimes it doesn't work out well. But clearly he's a great fit there. And I'm overjoyed for him. Going to be interesting to see where some of the other drivers land. But I think before we, totally put the wraps on this season, if we go back and reflect upon it, I think consistency was rewarded by Alex Palou for sure. But I think all in all, I like the idea that when you show up at a racetrack, you've got 25, 26 cars, and the overwhelming majority of those teams and drivers have an opportunity to qualify well and to win the race. And I think that proves to be that's a successful formula in terms of attracting more teams and more drivers and certainly more fans for sure. I enjoyed this season immensely. I really did. I was entertained by it from start to finish. And I mean, fans returned to the Indianapolis 500, the best script writers in Hollywood. Couldn't have written a better script than for it to have unfolded the way it did, and Elio to win his fourth. And I'm honored to have had the chance to be on the call for all four of his wins, 3 as a turn announcer and 1 as the anchor. I was thrilled for the fans that were able to be there, and certainly thrilled for Elio, who's a tremendous ambassador and a class act.
It was one of the great moments in racing that I've ever been a part of.
Yep,
and sure. I was a fan on this day. So. And I think Alex Palou, I think you couldn't have said it any better. I think He's a genuine person. I mean, he is as happy as he appears to be. I think he's fiery, competitive, but he just seems like a guy who doesn't let it get to him.
Yeah.
24 years old, teammate to Scott Dixon. You're challenging Scott Dixon for a championship, and you're challenging who many think is one of the true talents in the sport, and Pato Award. And you when you had to qualify well, you qualified well. When you had to finish well, you finished well. He had a couple incidences that weren't his fault, and boy, I just don't know more you can say. And you're talking about and we talked about how genuine he is. He did the Dale Jr. download the other day, and I don't know if it was for Dale Jr.'s daughter's first birthday or if it was maybe Dale Jr.'s first birthday. He brought a cake. He brought balloons. And some could say, well, and it's not like Dale Jr. had no idea he was bringing it. I mean, he walked into the door and he had it.
Well, KFC or Zaxby's or somebody ought to jump on this fried chicken thing that he says.
Oh, yeah.
A little sponsorship activation there. But no, I had the honor and privilege for the fourth year to join PRN. Nick Yeoman and I did for the Roval in Charlotte last weekend. And Brett McMillan, a pit reporter for PRN, interviewed Alex Palou in the pre-race show on Sunday, and just said all the right things. He really did. And I think he's going to be a tremendous ambassador during the offseason for the NTT IndyCar Series and serve the series very well as a champion moving forward. No doubt about it.
I agree. Aaron, how do you sum up this year?
Pretty much the same. I think, kind of like how Mark said, when Alex Palou was mentioned as, the driver of the number 10 car, I was like, why? What? Like, what's going on here? I remember, our buddy David Land did the video, and I still remember it was titled Chip's New Star. And I was just like, I don't know how this is going to turn out. But, obviously 2020, he had I think he had one third place. He had one podium of Road America. But the rest of the season really wasn't anything that really stood out. So him winning the first race was probably one of the most surprised I've ever been for a while. And as far as IndyCar racing goes in the winter, and obviously, he was consistent all year. And Dixon, there for a while, I definitely thought it was going to be the Scott Dixon season once again, because it kind of, there's a reason why they call him the Iceman. He comes out when you least expect it, when the pressure is most on him. And, he didn't really come to like I thought he would. But, obviously Alex Palou, it's really the season of Alex Palou. He was very close to winning the 500, but as you were saying with Elio, I don't think there's many people in that situation that could have beat Elio. You're Palou second year in the 500. He's raced against someone who's been in 21 500s. He's won there 3 times at this point. There's very few people that could have beat him in that situation. And as Scott was saying, it was definitely great for the sport. And just Alex Palou, what a great season. And one thing that I was thinking of a little bit ago, really the number 10 car, well, maybe not so much the number 10 car. Ganassi there for a while had a few cars that were almost kind of like revolving doors. Obviously Chilton, Kimball, the number 10 car was kind of revolving door there for a while because they had Ed Jones and then they had Kanaan. And I think Kanaan won a couple races, but, nothing like this. So, it's definitely, good to see, a lot more competitiveness in that car.
It's the most stability in that car since Dario drove it. Period.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
No one has been successful in that car as since Dario retired. I think history bears that out. And I made this, I don't want to put undue pressure on Alex Palou, but I remember the last time a guy spent a year in open wheel racing and was somewhat of an unknown, and Chip Ganassi hired him, and people wondered what the heck was Chip was doing. I believe he was only 20 years old at the time, and his name was Scott Dixon. And he promptly won a championship and was well on his way. And I think, his ascension at Ganassi Racing is kind of similar, if I remember right, to when Scott Dixon first joined that organization. So we'll see if he puts together anything close to the career that Scott Dixon has put together. He's got a lot of work to do for sure, but he's certainly in the right place to do it. And And to kind of put a period on my thoughts on Elio's Indy 500 win, it's not a big surprise, certainly, because I think if you go back and look at his average finishes over the years, I mean, he is and Donald Davidson, the historian of the Speedway, will reaffirm this, that there's no question Elio is one of the most successful that has ever raced there, and it's a 100+ year history. And he's, I think, going to have a chance to certainly win number 5 next year. Going to be interesting to see how the rest of his season unfolds, because quite frankly, other than that, he had his share of struggles with Meyershank in the handful of races that he drove. But I think the fact that he will be full-time in the series next year will make a big difference in him being competitive week in and week out. I know as Tom Brady has shown in the NFL, those 40-year-olds still have plenty of gas left in the tank, if you will. And I think Elio's certainly no exception to that.
I agree.
Did you already give your summary, Scott?
Yeah, I gave this whole season an A+. So
yeah, okay.
Yep.
Well, do you have anything else, Scott?
Well, you had one more question about the 2022 predictions.
Well, I think Mark kind of already answered that. But yeah, I mean, looking forward to 2022, like what is your, big prediction? I mean, is it Palou, kind of doing the same thing that he did this season, or you think, Dixon, or kind of what's your thoughts on next season?
Going to be interesting to see whether or not he takes that number 1. Because whoever has done that in the past, it's been a while since we've gone to back-to-back champions for sure. I won't say that number is a jinx, but it hasn't always translated into success for the series champion to come back and repeat. I think repeating is very, very difficult for all of the reasons that we just mentioned. I think, the driver roster is a long way from being settled. It's going to be interesting to see who lands where. But be interesting to see, again, if guys like, Rossi can rebound and recover, and Will Power, as we've touched upon, see if Penske can get back to their winning ways for sure. But I also think that given what happened, especially to Joseph Newgarden, when we get to St. Pete in late February, I think the pressure is going to be immediate on those that want to contend for a championship to qualify well and come out of there with a really good result. Because if you don't, you'd hate to think that you have lost the championship race 1, week 1 of the 2022 campaign. And that's certainly not out of the question with how very, very competitive that series is now.
Yeah, I got a couple takes for 2022. I honestly believe, and I mean this, I think Simon Pagenaud picks up 2 wins next year with Meyershank. I think with if the alliance, if the technical alliance is still in place as it is today, I think the smaller team will help him. I think having a driver who he's been teammates with before and has a great relationship with, I think that'll help him. So I see him picking up 2 wins. I see Helio very much in contention for the 500. It wouldn't surprise me that if even outside the 500 he picks up a win, a pole. I don't see him winning a bunch. I don't see him winning more than 1 race. I think Jack Harvey, if he can't podium, 2-3 times, I think it's going to be that second year. I mean, that second year is going to be really important to him. If he can't podium a couple times next year at Rahal, they're going to be really starting to look at the program and say, hey, man, you got to step it up for year 2.
Well, here's the question for Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing. What if Jack Harvey gets a win next year?
Right.
So now you've got Graham Rahal. Been a while since he's won a race. And since he's won a race, Takuma Sato's won a couple of races, including the Indy 500. Jack Harvey joins the team and he wins a race. So now who's the pressure on even more?
Right. And we got the third car who is not officially named yet, but by all the talk, it's probably going to be that Christian Lundgaard. I might have his name wrong, and he's going to be good.
Yeah.
So, from a car owner standpoint, I think Rahaal's going to be in really good shape next year. Driver standpoint, he's going to have some pressure on him.
What's interesting, Scott, I had this conversation with Nick Yeoman when we were in Charlotte. We were covering a NASCAR race and talking IndyCar. But I said, what's interesting to me is maybe, and I don't know that you necessarily include Andretti Autosport in this, but with Simon leaving, Penske has said that there's no guarantee that there's going to be a fourth car. They may just keep it with the three that they have and run a fourth at Indy. You wonder sometimes if maybe Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing looks at what other teams have accomplished and what other teams have done. You look at Foyt; they would like to add a third car, and this, and Aaron, you've seen it for sure. I think maybe other than for the 500, I think 3 cars are good. 4 cars, it becomes difficult, and as much as anything, not only you need sponsorship to make all 4 work. But let's face it, you need people to make all 4 work. And those are guys changing, the right front, the left front, right rear, left rear, the shock program. And I know some of those, guys work across all 3 cars. And the shock program is the shock program for all of the cars. But sometimes maybe I wonder if teams are starting to figure out that 4 cars stretch you a bit too thin and 3 is a more workable number.
I can't agree with that anymore. That because you start hearing these teams talk that they start bringing in people from their sports car program, and this, that, and the other to work on these cars. So then they're kind of split in their time, and people might think, what's the difference? I'm not saying there should be. There just is a difference, and I don't know what it is, but it just when you get too big or too stretched out.
Yep.
It just for some reason it doesn't always seem to work. But Andretti, like we were talking about when they was at the time was the modern day super team, they were always up front. So I'm not saying it can't happen. I know Penske's had great success, but I would say that I bet you Simon Pagenaud really enjoys going back to the 2-car team.
Yeah, I would say that's probably accurate for sure. And he'll be the first one to tell you. Obviously, thankful for his time at Team Penske, and won a championship or won a 500, and changes the way you're introduced when you have accomplishments like that. But I also find it interesting that did I read somewhere he's the only driver that's ever willingly left that organization to race for another team full time. I don't know that that's ever happened before. So it'll be. I
didn't realize that was a willful leave.
I think I saw that. I do. I think I might have read that somewhere, and maybe it wasn't behind the scenes. I don't know. But if that is the case, I believe in recent memory, he's the only one that's left willingly for a full-time ride with another team. I'm almost sure I saw that written somewhere. And, if I saw it on social media, the internet, it's bound to be true, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can't question that. Yeah.
Especially Twitter.
That's concrete right there.
That's right.
Yeah, I just think as far as other teams go, I just don't see Foyt getting any better right now, and personnel is a huge part of that.
Yep.
I just think that when you got Bourdais in there, and I mean they ran okay. I'm not saying they didn't run okay, but I feel like Sebastian was carrying that deal. I mean, it's outside looking in.
Yeah, there's no question. And I think if you go back to the disastrous weekend they had at Texas Motor Speedway, I mean, Bourdais had really gotten his season off to a really good start. And then, the disaster struck him at Texas. And I don't know that he ever found his groove after that. And I got to believe that in some way, shape, or form, it's got to be a little difficult, running it partially out of Hockley, Texas, and partially out of Indianapolis. That's got to be difficult. I think they themselves had higher expectations for this season because they had developed some consistency with their engineering staff and their team, and had the same drivers back. And it'll be interesting to see who lands with that race team. I think there's an expectation level that Dalton Kellett will be back. And I know they hope to see improvement from Dalton, and Dalton hopes to see that improvement as well. But, I remember in the early days of the IRL with our driver analyst, Davey Hamilton, who's a two-time series runner-up and a series champion like Scott Sharp, and just how, with Billy Bode and winning the 500 with a power team with Kenny Breck. I mean, in the early days of the IRL, they were some bad dudes. And I know that the efforts continue by Larry and that organization to get that ship going in the right direction. And hopefully that'll happen in 2022 for sure.
I really don't think it's an effort issue on the team. I just, there's something missing, and it has to be on the engineering side somewhere. And I'm not saying anything bad about the engineers they've got. It's just, there's just something's not clicking in that organization.
Well, I know they've had Scott Harner for a while now, and Scott had well documented success at Ganassi for a number of years. I remember Scott when he was with Brad Calkins and his operation with Buzz, who was the first series co-champion. And obviously he's been around a long time and knows a lot of guys. And so, it's a process for them, just like it's been for Dale Coyne, and it continues to be for Ed Carpenter. Again, it's a tough nut to crack because of how very competitive it is, and with all the talented teams and drivers in the series.
It'd be interesting to see if Carlin goes to a second car. They seem pretty reluctant, but you hear Chilton saying he wants a second car. That'll be interesting. I mean, didn't they for a small period of time? Didn't they run two cars for a?
Yeah, well, they did, and again, I've never worked for a race team and probably won't. I think once upon a time, this effort to have one guy in a car on ovals and one guy in the car for road and street courses, I think it had a window of success there. Mike Conway was the first one to do it successfully for Ed Carpenter Racing. But boy, I think when you look at what the last couple of years, what Connor Daly, the situation that he's been in, driving for two different race teams, sometimes from 1 week to the next, speaking two different languages, two different jargons, two different, phrases and lines of communication and everything. I don't know that your opportunities for success moving forward are really good with that scenario. I think it's okay if you want to add a third car for a one-off for, say, for instance, the 500. But I think moving forward, I think the teams that, have one guy in a car for road and street courses and one guy in that car for ovals are going to be teams that, by and large, that are going to continue to struggle because of the lack of continuity. That's just my opinion.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right on that.
Now, you were talking about Foyt. One thing I was thinking of, I don't think there's probably any other I don't think there's a better driver they can get in that car besides Sebastian Bourdais, especially that they can afford or they can get. I mean, and a lot of the IRL guys, true IRL fans may not be really aware of what Sebastian Bourdais has done. But, I mean, in Champ Car, he won what, 4 championships in a row?
One of the greatest of all time, period.
Oh, absolutely.
One of the greatest wheel racers of all time, no question.
And when he's in that car and, he's not really, having real good results, it really, kind of makes you kind of scared for the future with Foyt. And especially since he's not going to be back, at least for a full term basis. And I know there's some other drivers you're thinking of getting. I know that Tatiana Calderon or whatever is in the running for that ride because of the whole Rocket deal, because they're wanting to get more women into motorsports, which is good. But, like I was saying, if Sebastian Bourdais can't, provide results in that car, I don't think there's really anyone they can get that's going to be able to, unless they just completely turn that program around.
Yeah, again, it's a question of a driver. There's no, just like a quarterback and an offensive coordinator, a quarterback and a head coach if he's the O coordinator, and a pitcher and a pitching coach. And I think the same is true of a driver and an engineer. I mean, you've got to have the right combination, and you've got to have it's a chemistry issue as much as anything. And I'm not suggesting there was a chemistry issue at AJ Foyt Racing. And again, I think, Bourdais was snake bitten by some bad luck, but let's face it, there were a couple of races and a handful of instances where Sebastian made some questionable decisions that may have, taken him out of any opportunity to be successful in a race at a top 10 or a podium. But I think you guys hit the nail on the head. It's certainly not an effort issue for sure. And, who knows? I mean, if they get themselves a good, strong veteran, to pair with Dalton Kellett or whomever it is, that maybe they can start getting themselves, into top 10 or top 12 situations. And I know a lot of people would be awfully happy about that because there are still a lot of AJ Foyt fans out there for sure. And I like Larry. I do. I've had the opportunity to talk to him not only from a racing perspective, but my wife's a bit of a wine snob, so we spend a lot of time at the AJ Foyt Winery on Main Street and Speedway, and I know that they just opened a new winery in Texas that's actually a destination point. There's I won't call it a bed and breakfast, but they actually have accommodations there, and they're going to use it as a rewards program for their wine club members. And
oh wow.
I know that element of their business continues to grow and be very, very successful. And so, hopefully, certainly, many hope for better days ahead for AJ Foyt Racing.
Yeah, I do. Super Tex is Super Tex, right? But
yep,
he'd sure like to see. I mean, he doesn't do it because he doesn't love it. So you'd like to see them just have some success again. And as far as Sebastian Bourdais goes, if anybody's ever wanted to see how committed that guy is all they got to do is watch that crash he had at the Speedway qualifying. And what I don't think a lot of people understand is he never lifted. And he was trying to save that car the entire time, right up until it hit the fence.
Well, I believe he had stated after that accident occurred, and I think he may have told this story on IndyCar Radio, that he knew the lap prior to that he would never complete that run. But he said, I was going for it. I was hopeful I would complete it, but I had a sneaking suspicion on the lap before that if I took that same line at that same speed, that it wasn't going to end well for me. But I just went for it, and that's what happened. So that is an indication of the many things that separate them from us, for sure.
That's right. I mean, that thing wiggled and never lifted. Yeah. And I said, man, you say whatever you want about Sebastian Bourdais, but you cannot question that guy's commitment.
Yep, he's a bad dude for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And we didn't have this really on our list of things to talk about, but since the last time we talked, Robin Miller obviously passed away. And what are some of your thoughts on just Robin and his overall kind of just what he kind of meant to the paddock and being around the IndyCar?
Certainly could be one of the most polarizing members of the media in the history of motorsports. It's interesting to see all the adulation and the accolades that were bestowed upon Robin, over the last year or so, given his rather contentious relationship with the Hallman George family and the Speedway during the split, especially. I think it's a clear indication, though, that regardless of your history and regardless of your differences, you can move past those things and find some sort of common ground. I think Robin was of the opinion that everyone had a right to his opinion, whether they agree with it or not. But I will say that, when you look at the outpouring of support and, as I said, the adulation that were bestowed upon Robin and my dear friend and mentor, Bob Jenkins, I think that comes from years of building relationships and friendships and trust among those in the innermost workings of the sport. And I know that when he put his fingers on the keyboard, be it a laptop or be it an old typewriter, he's as good as there ever was in terms of his ability to write about motorsports. And it was a labor of love for him. And he'll be sorely missed for sure, just like Bob and just like far too many we're having to say goodbye to of late. And I didn't know him really well. I knew him well enough. We talked on several occasions and traded emails. And once upon a time, not too long ago, the NTT IndyCar Series had some of us contributing articles to IndyCar.com. And I would, I would get something done and I would send it off to Robin and, damn, son, you can write too, that sort of thing. And so, and coming from him, that was high praise and the ultimate compliment. And, I know he'll be missed. And as I said, an interesting character for sure. And he made no apologies. He was who he was. And I know that those that are closest to him and were closest to him will miss him dearly. And I think motorsports will miss him dearly. And I'm thankful for Robin to have had the last 5 or 6 years of his career that he had, because I think he became universally revered and loved and respected. Not that he wasn't before, but I think, again, he had moved past some of those issues that he had with the split and those things. And I think really enjoyed the last several years of his career. And he was always a supporter of mine, had good things to say about what we did and how we did it. And I'll be eternally grateful for that for sure.
His sister knew him well to pick a Parnelli Jones decanter of the turbine to put his ashes in.
Yep,
now
sure.
that his sister, she knew him well, and I think he would love that. I agree with that. As far as what you're saying, I think I think at the end, people who may have been his adversaries, at the end of the day, really respected his passion for it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's what it boils down to. I mean, I think as he got older, as we often do, I think you learn to develop the ability to disagree without being disagreeable. And that's how I would characterize, the last several years of his motorsports career. And I don't think, though, if 20 years ago, if anyone would have told him that he would have ended up having the career that he had on television, especially on NBC SN. I think he would have laughed and said, "Yeah, no, what the hell would they want my ugly mug on television for?" But he did it. His run along the grid in the pre-race, and just his down home, relaxed manner in which he interviewed all the drivers and everything, I think became very, very popular and added to his popularity for sure.
Yeah, I don't think there was any better 2 minutes on TV than the Robin Miller grid run. That was definitely something I always look forward to, and I was definitely upset when they didn't do that anymore.
Well, it's not scripted, and I think that's the beauty of it. And oftentimes, television especially can be far too scripted, and it's not as organic that way. And that's that was a way to kind of to step outside that box a little bit. And I think it proved to be popular with the viewers.
And the State Fair thing that he did too was also very popular. And me and Scott have often joked about doing different, and you know what I'm talking about, Scott, different video things, with drivers and stuff like that, kind of take people out of their comfort zone and, try something new. And that's something that people definitely really enjoy.
Yeah, we've got a feature on our show called, a 90-second lap with Jake Query. And Jake does that very thing. I mean, he picks a different driver out and, what's the first car you ever owned? What's the first movie that ever made you cry? If you pulled up iTunes on your phone, give me 5 songs that you have on iTunes. So, questions like that I think drivers sometimes are a little relieved to get questions like that, especially a driver maybe who things aren't going as well for, instead of, asking, hey, why are you struggling or why aren't you fast? It gives them an opportunity to get away from that for just a few minutes or so. And that's become a pretty popular feature of ours. It's along the lines of what Robin did with the grid walk for sure.
Oh,
yeah, I think that's a very, very fair assessment, and especially just kind of treating the driver. I mean, this is gonna sound ridiculous to say, but just treating them like you treat any other person,
Yep.
right? Because they get people coming at them every day wanting, hey, they want to know what you're doing tomorrow, or why'd you do this wrong, or what happened here, and if you can just be in your environment and not get just bombarded with this ridiculousness.
Yep.
I mean, I think that goes a long way, me personally. But
well, I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else, Scott?
I really don't, except for Mark. I said it last time. I'll say it again, man. It's always just great listening to you, and now we get to talk to you, and it's just thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and just very appreciated.
Well, guys, I'm telling you, if this pandemic lightens the grip a little bit, one way or another, be it in May for the 500 or one of our practice sessions, or maybe in our studios in Indianapolis, I do owe you guys a visit to the booth, and I'm going to do all I can in 2022. Hopefully, some normalcy will continue to return to our lives, and we'll be have you guys in the booth, or either at the Speedway or there at our studios on 16th Street next year.
Yeah, no, I definitely really appreciate all the time you've given us the past couple of months, and definitely all the support. And yeah, it really means a lot.
Well, guys,
it does.
Anytime. I love spending time with you. I love talking racing with racers like you guys, and thank you for all you do for the sport, for sure.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
All right. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Talk to you, Mark.
Take care.
Thanks.
Yep.